This is the Everyone's Agnostic Podcast with Cass Midgley and Marie Delafont.
We interview people you don't know about a subject no one wants to talk about. We hope to encourage people in the process of deconstructing their faith and help curb the loneliness that accompanies it. We think the world is a better place when more people live by sight, not by faith. Please subscribe to our podcast and leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts. Also, you can support us monetarily in 2 easy ways. You can pledge
$1 million
or more through Patreon. That's patreon.com/EA podcast, or leave a lump sum donation through PayPal at our website, everyone'sagnostic.com. The smallest contribution is greatly appreciated.
Welcome, everyone, to episode 239 of the Everyone's Agnostic Podcast. I'm Cass Midgley. Keep in mind, someday each of us are going to fall asleep and never wake up. This podcast is free to all and free of ads. So a big thanks to each and every one of our Patreon and PayPal supporters. Today, Marie Delafont and I chat with Steve Hilliker of the Voices of Deconversion Podcast. Steve Hilliker is an ex-conservative Christian living near Seattle with his wife and teenage sons. Steve deconverted from Christianity in 2005 while earning his bachelor's degree in biblical studies and planning to be a pastor. What followed was a major crisis. Steve's career path was gone, and his wife still a Christian. He worried about how they would raise their kids. He couldn't find resources or community and struggled greatly with depression. Years later, Steve realized the importance for himself and others in discussing these experiences. In 2017, he started the Voices of Deconversion Podcast to encourage ex-Christian atheists and agnostics. Before we get into our talk with Steve and Marie's monologue, let me just say that I have Christian friends that I think are good, honest, impressive people in spite of their belief in the supernatural. Somehow they remain yes-sayers to what is. They just also say yes to some things that ain't, but haven't allowed it to sour them or taint them or make them assholes. But for the most part, I can't bring myself to fully trust religious people. And that includes Christians who insist they're not religious, maybe especially so. It truly scares me when I see people forfeiting their agency, their human capacity for critical thinking. They distrust themselves and end up trusting outside sources for wisdom, guidance, or direction, be it a book, a person, an invisible friend, a still small voice in their heads, which can seem internal, but we know that our brains give us thoughts that we didn't conjure, meaning they didn't come from within. Mind you, I'm not talking about education. Truth is, we get 99% of our wisdom from others. The difference is, it goes through our personal filters, sifting, weighing, and hopefully verifying the truth of it. All this was sparked in me this morning as I was driving on Mother's Day, Sunday, May 12th, and saw many families walking into their churches. I truly wanted to roll down my window and say, "Don't go in there." I think religions and supernaturalism can have horrific and abusive effects on people, society, and relationships. To be completely honest, I wanted to flip the bird to all these people flocking into the churches. And I do mean flocking, behaving like dumb, blindly obedient, zero personal agency sheep, just like all controlling tyrannical authorities like it. Now let's pause here for a second and measure the absurdity of what I've just said. For the first 40 years of my life, I loved God, Jesus, the Bible, the church, with all my heart. If you knew me then, I was all in. To a fault, of course, but that's what we thought was the way. Love the Lord with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. I press on toward the goal to win the prize for which God has called me heavenward in Christ Jesus. Don't grow weary in doing good. Though he slay me, I will follow. I'm not ashamed of the gospel. Well done, good and faithful servant. Even this week, an old friend who knew me when I was in ministry reminded me of how I used to teach Romans 1:20. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that men are without excuse. I'm going to overlook for now the judgment and accountability that's insinuated in that verse. To remember that when I was a Christian, it was the sheer wonder of life that pointed to an intelligent designer, and of course it was Christianity that codified that otherwise mysterious creator, and the only correct one at that. But the leap from a mysterious God to a specific God could not be any larger nor more dangerous to humanity. A personalized God is an easily weaponized God. Yeah, that bird flying in my front yard yesterday, demonstrating with ease the art of flying and taking no credit for inventing itself, no way of knowing or measuring the perfect weight, thrust, lift, drag, and feather shape to produce flying, that has to be God. However, I'm more in awe than ever at such things. Back when I was a theist, I had to come up with a reason for billions of insects, animals, fish, and birds to be busy living, dying, killing each other, while no one was looking or caring. It was for the glory of God. He was watching and taking delight. Otherwise, we might think our lives are just as meaningless as the anthill destroyed by the lawnmower. That was unthinkable for me for the first 40 years of my life, but I've spent the last 13 remapping my brain so that I could say yes to what is, just agree with reality. Horrifying at first, but surprisingly delightful these days. Now, the only thing clear about this life in which we find ourselves is that everything happens exactly as it would if there were no God. I don't shame myself anymore for having believed the type of things that I taught back then, and reflections on that bird in my front yard recently remind me of why I did, and I forgive myself. So I'm wanting to shine a light on the enormous feat of turning the Titanic from full-on faith to zero faith. The wildly unimaginable experience of going from happily Christian to happily atheist. How is that possible? Well, I asked this question to some of our listeners, and some of their questions are as follows. Leah says, for me, the unfathomability of the cosmos is actually what finally snuffed the last flame of my faith. When I was young and being raised in the church, I knew that I wasn't supposed to comprehend the infinity of God. But once I understood the infinity of the universe, I recognized that it was so much bigger than the God of my religion. Some people find the smallness of themselves terrifying. They want to place the toil of life in a much bigger picture. But to me, this recognition is such a relief. The end of my reality is simply the end. And I am so incredibly relieved to not live for eternity. Ruth writes, working with other faiths and realizing that they dismissed my Christian beliefs as easily as I dismissed theirs, I started to realize we can't all be right. I'm so much happier now, realizing that no one has to be right. And she posted a meme that said, all things are very uncertain, and that's exactly what makes me feel reassured. Maria writes, becoming born again was actually a step in my deconversion. I just didn't know it. It was a step away from my family's Catholic faith. I had to question before I took that leap. It's no surprise that I'd keep on questioning. My seeking truth led me to where I am now, living a natural life in the natural world, loving my experience and all those I travel with it, more than I ever could have imagined. Elizabeth writes, it's all so much simpler now. Shit happens because shit happens. I don't need to know. I don't need to somehow believe God is involved, or it's some part of a bigger plan. I don't need to worry about the eternal fate of those I love, and indeed most of the world's population. I don't need to work out what his mysterious plan for my life is. I can think for myself, weigh things up, and make my own choices. I am free. Bethany writes, "What makes me happy as a skeptic is the freedom to question ideas and concepts that should be questioned. Growing up as a pastor's kid, I could never doubt God's goodness or question anything within the faith, let alone nurture my intellectual potential and independence as a woman. It's so refreshing now to study evolution without feeling like I'll burn in hell or learn from philosophy. The world is much bigger and brighter now. It's also beyond fucking freeing to not have to ascribe spiritual meaning to every little thing. There is no grand design, and that's more than okay by me." Some of our listeners are lifelong atheists, and Tad writes, "Around the age of 6 to 8, I realized everyone else wasn't pretending this God of theirs was real, and I was the only one who apparently already thought he was imaginary." Randy writes, "For me, coming from my narrow evangelical fundamentalist Pentecostal prophetic belief system, I started questioning and turned to Christian versus Christian debates on the Unbelievable podcast. Hearing these, I learned that both sides loved Jesus, the Bible, and truly believed their personal beliefs were right. I realized that a perfect book, written by a perfect God, by his chosen authors, revealed to us by his perfect Spirit, was all bullshit, or God is absolutely the worst communicator ever. Either way, this realization broke the illusion of my belief system and set me free." Tanya writes, "Learning that I create my own destiny, that I don't have to leave it to a God who doesn't give a shit, was a very empowering moment for me. Even though I believe that all our conscious energy is interconnected, I do not leave anything to a supposed all-knowing, all-seeing God. It's up to me to shape my life." Another listener writes, "Realizing there wasn't some perfect God out there being hard on me, let me be less hard on myself, and that was the happiest part of all." Listener Nathan Cartel writes, "As a devout Southern Baptist and a 29-year Christian, I was happy thinking I was part of God's family, chosen, and in a mission to help rescue the world. Things were simple then, too. Then I went to seminary. The experience rocked my faith. Fast forward 5 years after being unemployed because I left the faith, getting thrown into poverty and a divorce, and I'm happier than I've ever been. Life is both simpler and more complicated. There isn't a pat answer for everything, and I'm not chosen anymore, but I also don't feel intellectually stymied. I get to make my own choices without worrying if I'm making a Heavenly Father mad. I get to blaze my own path. I've redefined and rediscovered myself. I don't need to pretend other women aren't attractive, but I also don't need to see them as temptations. They're humans, and so am I. I don't need to worry if my funding will be cut because I'm politically liberal and I don't fit the SBC box. I don't need to worry that someone is always looking over my shoulder, and I don't need to worry what anyone else thinks of me. I can enjoy science and politics and my partner in an authentic way." Former guest of the show, Bonnie, writes, "They handed me peace and freedom, and it felt heavy and restrictive. Then finally, after decades of impaired existence, I thought for myself, and they started to fall away. Letting go of magical thinking and walking out of the fog, fear, obligation, and guilt, was the born-again moment I always wanted. The thing is, I never needed that crap in the first place. I guess this is my plan B. B spelt B-E. My thanks to all the listeners who shared those thoughts. Nowadays, if I find out you're religious, I just don't want to spend much time with you. Why is that? Well, number one, you believe in hell. But overall, I just see no saying. You say no to what is. Science, facts, but worst of all, you say no to what it means to be human. Whereas now, I fucking celebrate being human. Some of us who have left the faith have undergone an enormous transformation. The truth really did set us free. We've turned the Titanic around, and now it's a hovercraft going in the opposite direction. We went from being unable to imagine the thought of there being no God to being unable to imagine there being one, or at least a personal anthropomorphic God. How does one go from being born a decent human being to thinking Donald Trump is a reliable, responsible, moral leader? Or that eternal torture is ever a good idea, especially as a punishment for being a creature capable of horrendously poor choices? It happens by forfeiting our personal agency, our ability to think for ourselves. We end up distrusting ourselves and trusting Trump or some charismatic fellow human, as flawed as us. Whatever mechanism can make that happen is the scariest machine on the planet. We taped this conversation on March 3rd, 2019. The intro music on this episode is Just Groove Me by Dave Weckl. The segue music is by Sam Mayer. Thanks for listening, and be a yes-sayer to what is. And now, a brilliant monologue and announcements by my wonderful co-host, Marie Delafont.
Today I want to discuss something that is incredibly hard for me to put into words. Moreover, to put those words into a coherent message. Mindfulness, meditation, being present in the moment. Maybe it looks like sitting upright with your hands on your knees, a pillow underneath you, your eyes closed, while you pay attention to your breath. Maybe it looks like your flow through child's pose, down dog, mountain pose, and warrior two, as you sense the strength and tension of your muscles. Maybe it looks like waiting for your bus, but placing your attention on the sounds that you hear, letting them consume all of your attention, hushing all of your thoughts about the past or the potential future. Maybe it looks like sitting in a park, a beer in hand, focus placed on a group of squirrels, watching their social interactions and appreciating their individuality and their society. Being present looks a lot of different ways, and they all stress the living fuck out of me. If you haven't figured it out by now, I have strong streaks of a type A personality. I was much more type B when I was a kid, but religion and the desire to be accepted suppressed that free spirit in me. Instead of unabashedly, unashamedly writing a script about a cop dog and filming it in stop animation, I was vigorously taking notes in church, trying to prove to someone that I was enough. Being taught about spiritual war in the minds of humanity, my mind was no longer a safe place. It was not my friend. It wasn't a source of helpful information. It was a battlefield. Its creations were no longer to be trusted. I spent less and less time swaying carefree in my mind's beautiful flow, and more time disciplining it, suppressing it, distrusting it. Anything questionable manifested in my cognition was immediately subjected and shuffled off into the hands of God to help me manage. I was about 15 when this shift happened. I deconverted fully in my mid-20s, yet this disassociation and distrust of my mind remains firmly in place. When I am present in my mind, I fucking hate it. My mind is not a safe place. It's chaotic, it's mean, it's cruel. It talks incessantly about my impending death. It goes on and on endlessly about how unattractive I am. It is relentless in ensuring I never think that I am enough as I am ever about anything. Why the fuck would I want to be present with that?
"Oh, Marie, you're doing it wrong. You just need to watch your thoughts go by, like clouds going by in the sky, like logs floating down a river, like turning off the director's commentary on a movie." Yeah, no, I get it. I know how I'm supposed to do mindfulness. So many metaphors to tap into. I got it. So I'm supposed to watch my thoughts. Okay, I'm having a thought about how I'm supposed to watch my thoughts. Okay, so now I'm having a thought about how weird it is that I thought about watching me thinking about watching my thoughts. Okay, so now I'm having a thought about how all this circular watching is making me feel fucking crazy. And so on and so forth. It is crazy making. So why the fuck do I do it? Who is forcing me? Enough sources in my life have told me that I need meditation and mindfulness. I have an anxiety disorder, a panic disorder, ADD, perfectionism, and some PTSD. My therapist says it, my friends and partners say it, but most importantly, I also say it. I also believe I need meditation and mindfulness. Why? Because I know it can work. I've had some successful periods of practicing those cognitive exercises, and I could sense how deeply serene and content I felt with myself when I was able to tolerate the incessant negative chatter, albeit for a short time. But my perfectionism always catches up with me. Perfectionism has gotten me pretty far in life. I've got to give it that. I've gained additional privilege and opportunity because of the constant demands I put on myself. But you know where perfectionism doesn't work? In mindfulness, in meditation. It is the antithesis, which places me into a catch-22 situation. All right, Marie, what you need to do to help mitigate your perfectionism and related symptoms is mindfulness. Okay, but I can't because of perfectionism. Oh yeah, no problem. Just be mindful. Yeah, but perfectionism. Yeah, be mindful. It's enough to make me go fucking crazy. So much so that I talk to myself. And let's not forget the aforementioned cognitive abuse of religion, which led me to ultimately distrust that space between my ears, which didn't let me make friends with my mind, figure out how to work with it, to love it, to be attentive and nurturing to it. So what the fuck do I do? Well, to be honest, I haven't done much. I try in fits and starts to get familiar with being present with my mind, but it rarely lasts. It's always approached with, experienced with, and ceased with shame. Thus enters the scene good old polyamory. My new boyfriend, date boy, is a bit of an anomaly. I affectionately call him Buddha. He naturally experiences his mind in the ways that I've just outlined in terms of being present, experiencing, and appreciating the moments that he's in. It's super fucking cute. The other day, we were at a cafe, and he got distracted from our conversation because he was so pleased with how gracefully the light rail came to a stop and then started back up again. Another day, he bought a bag of candy and he poked every different piece, squeezed it, smelled it, tasted it, commented on what he liked and what he didn't like. And nearly every time I see him, he'll get lost in his appreciation of me, of my body, of his favorite parts. It's simply overwhelming for me. Who the fuck is this guy? Dateboy inspires me. He's a type B all the way. And in that way, we're intensely incompatible if you think about it. But we make it work by asking for what we need and honoring each other's needs. I'm learning so much from him. We've begun recently to talk about this meditation and mindfulness subject. I had largely ignored it because I get nowhere. Better to just avoid it and structure myself into someone who looks like they're living an amazing life, who is highly successful, productive, intelligent. But God fucking forbid that I sit alone on a swing for 10 fucking minutes without needing to physically run away from my own thoughts. But Date Boy has started to challenge a lot of the fucked up ideas about what being in the moment can mean. For one fucking thing, there's no one way to do it. What? This sounds familiar. Didn't we talk about this with Dr. Eric Sprinkle, the satanic sex doctor? Yes, but that was about sex. That sex isn't inherently anything. It's what you want to do. So being present doesn't have to look a certain way, doesn't have to last a certain amount of time, doesn't have to recur at a certain frequency, which is a fucking relief for sex and for being present. Because coming from a background where spirituality and your relationship with God was so strictly prescribed to you, I am so fucking over being told how to be myself and how to be with myself. I don't have to wake up early every morning to go sit up straight in the closet staring at the wall, watching my thoughts for 5 minutes a day. I don't have to do fuck all. The name of the game here is to honor myself, to honor my mind, to be friends with my mind. Not even that, because I'm not a dual being. I am my mind. We are one unit. We can't be enemies. And so I've started to try again to be mindful, to be present in the moment. It's hard. I'm often bombarded with thoughts about how I'm not doing it right. And that makes me feel desperate and frantic, and I want to run away and to distract. But you know what helps? Recognizing how beautiful my mind is. It is not, in fact, a completely undisciplined dog on a leash who is literally dragging you along a gravel road, biting you if you try to direct it elsewhere. I'm finding my mind is just fucking ridiculously beautiful. The moments I've found to watch it have cultivated a love and appreciation for it. It questions everything. I'm so thankful it questions everything. It's so curious. It's often focused on the things that scare me, and it makes sure to talk over and over and over about it, I assume, with the intent that I would listen and address my own concerns. It is not the devil. It is not influenced by the devil. My mind is mine. It's a space I am just getting to know, just starting to love. The negative self-talk is still a very serious battle for me, but at the same time, I'm cultivating some profound love and appreciation for this ape mind of mine that is neither good nor bad. It simply is. And it is capable of so much. And I'm so relieved to be learning that I have the freedom to engage with it on my terms. I'm pretty excited for what's to come, because if I can make peace with my mind, I'm pretty sure I will be unstoppable. And just some quick announcements. As always, we've got some merch on sale, some stickers and some magnets that say yes to what is. And you can purchase those on everyone'sagnostic.com. All new Patreon supporters get one for free. If you want to contact us, shoot us an email at everyone'sagnostic@gmail.com. And if you want to get more involved in our community, ask to be added to our private Facebook group or our virtual support group and or our sexuality discussion group. And to stay informed, you can always follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And lastly, I just want to call out to our listeners in Nigeria who speak the language Hausa. I am not going to say this right because Google Translate will not actually pronounce it for me. So here we go. Nagode don sararo kuma kakse aga abin da yake. And now for the show with Cass, me, and Steve Hilliker.
Namaste.
Sat Sri Akal.
Nice. So, Steve, I know that we've pulled you out of church to do this. Are you going to be okay with that?
Yeah, it's fine. My pastor won't mind.
Okay. What role are you playing in the church currently?
Yeah, that would be none.
So you have a theological education. In fact, it was during that kind of your theological world got rocked, right?
Yeah. It was the end of my junior year, and my wife and I had moved on to the campus of Trinity Lutheran College. And that winter of my junior year, I started learning things about like the infallibility of Scripture. So I had been an inerrancy person, so I thought everything was literally true in the Bible.
Yeah.
And so I started learning about like this view amongst Christians that, the Bible can be viewed as allegory, and it can still have meaning, even though it's like,
not literal.
Yeah. And so I kind of was getting excited about that and what I was learning, because then I didn't have to believe things like, the snake talked in the garden and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Which, is embarrassing as a Christian, like when people call you out on stuff like that.
Right, for sure.
So I'm getting excited, but my wife's still like an ardent Christian. So kind of everything got stripped away when I was talking to her one day about like how I felt about maybe Jesus was just like a really a good prophet or a good teacher, and maybe he wasn't divine. And I think I was blocking out the part of my brain that would have said, Steve, this is going down a path you may not want to go down, And
the famous slippery slope.
Yeah. And I think I was just in denial. Like, we talk about the 5 stages of grief. I think I was denying what was happening, And so as I'm washing the dishes and we're talking, she just goes, "You're not a Christian anymore." And I turned and looked at her like in complete shock.
Yeah.
And I go, "What are you talking about? Like, of course I'm a Christian, But like shortly after that, it sinks in like, she's right. I'm not. And then it was just, then it was what I call like, I had a major life crisis at that point.
Yeah.
Isn't it funny how in a way, I mean, because we're Christians, we're really good at compartmentalization, and you basically had compartmentalized to your own self that you were losing your faith just because of like what we do with all hard to imagine things, compartmentalize them. And then she holds up a mirror and says, "Hey, buddy."
Yeah. And, that was really tough, because then, of course, as you guys both know, like then the questions of, well, what about our marriage? What about how do we raise our kids now? We were praying with them every night. We were going to church. And my career, like this was my career. And not only that, it was my calling. It was like my purpose in life, to be a pastor. And so that's all gone, like in a moment, you know?
Yeah.
So, well, it's been over a decade now. How'd that go?
Well, I mean, honestly, it was tough. Like, I think the decade after that all happened, just to kind of like, I guess, bring everyone up to speed. So my wife, about a year or two later, kind of came to the belief on her own terms in her own way that she is also an atheist.
Okay.
Oh, wow.
And for different reasons. So mine was very like, I was in school, so it was very academic. I was learning these things about the Bible. It was deconstructing it for me.
Yep, totally.
But for her, it was the idea that like, there's a billion Muslims out there, and they're all going to go to hell, and they're going to hell because they were born in a part of the world that just doesn't have Christianity, and God created them and made them there. And so her thinking of like, how could God do this to these people? And they have spiritual experiences just like Christians do. And she kind of got thinking about those things. And that's kind of what got her kind of doubting her own religious experiences and started to question her faith. And eventually she became an atheist as well.
Yep. Well, I want to address this slippery slope thing, because here's the thing. I mean, I think we all know now, at least in this room, that it's a house of cards and that it's just hanging on by a thread and everything. But the people that are, and I grew up around them too. Like, we probably all were around people that just said, you have to believe in the inerrancy of Scripture. You have to stick to these tenets. And if you don't, you start to get loosey-goosey with any of them. It's a slippery slope, and before you know it, you are sliding down into a place where it's not going to go well for you. So warning, warning, warning. Mayday, mayday, mayday. Don't touch that Holy Bible. Keep it inerrant. Because the moment that you give an inch to maybe it's metaphorical here, but literal here or whatever, and so the guard that these people have on their own minds and on their, on their doctrines, like they want everybody in the church to hold to this. Well, the truth is they're right. If you do give it an inch, it will fall apart. It's the thread in that sweater. It's the Jenga pin. And they're right to guard it in that if they want to keep the lie alive, they have to guard it. And so I don't know. It always has been something to where I got on the other side when the sweater unraveled and I went, they were right. It was a slippery slope, but slippery slopes are fun. That's why we have them. We make amusement parks out of them. It's been fun.
That can be fun and terrifying.
Yeah, both. Exactly. Great point, because we do scream all the way down.
That's true. Kicking and screaming, yeah.
And Steve, when you were studying the Bible and when you were Christian, what was your take on the Bible, like in terms of like the Old Testament? And I'm asking this because for me, I was raised in a way to believe that all of that stuff happened, and also that it's all applicable to us. Like these stories of these people and the things that all the prophets wrote are really things that God is saying to us. So like it personalized literally everything in the Bible. There was no way that you could keep in mind the context and that this wasn't written for you and how to do your yoga class or something. Like, were you raised that way too, to kind of read it that way?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And it's this weird tension of like the Old Testament's the Old Testament and Jesus replaced the old laws, but you read, Noah's Ark and you feel like, well, God would save me. Or you think of Jonah and the whale and like you're putting yourself in Jonah's place. Like, God tests me too. And I need to just be faithful to him, just like Jonah. So it's this funny, like they don't follow all the rules in the Old Testament because some of them are ridiculous and some of them are horrible. Some of the examples of, God annihilating whole peoples because they didn't do exactly what he said. But you put that aside. And like Cass was saying, you compartmentalize those things. But yeah, absolutely. I read the Bible as if it was, God's instruction book for life to me, just like it is for every other Christian. That's how I saw it.
Because, did you ever do one of those things where, like, you were really worked up about something and then you would just close your eyes and pray and then open up the Bible and just kind of take whatever you found and, like, assume that was God telling you that?
Yeah. I was actually talking to my wife and my son about that, and it's just superstition. You know what I mean? It's, like, no better than any of these other, like, superstitious things that people do. It's really funny when you look back on it.
Reading tea leaves.
Exactly.
Or reading the bones or dice or anything else.
Or an 8-ball or...
Yeah.
Right.
Or, like, even worse, it's like take away the scripture part of it. Say that you had, like, Anne Frank's diary or something, like, because that's what the Bible is. It's somebody's diary. Like, they were writing shit out about their feelings about being conquered by the Assyrians and the Babylonians and the Persians, and they wrote angry diaries about it. Invoking their God. And so then, like, you take those diaries and then you decide that that's the diaries, like, about you and what to do with your life, and then you randomly open it up and it's absurd.
Well, and it was criticized in the circles that I ran in. I mean, like opening the book and putting your finger down and reading it, they would say that is, I mean, they would say that is voodoo or whatever.
Okay.
Well, and I think like my pastors probably would have said that's not a good way to discern God's will for your life. But in that moment, like Marie was saying, when you're in a crisis or you're really struggling with some choice you have to make, you just revert to those things. Like in your room by yourself, it's like, okay, I'm just going to like do this and look for guidance from God,
Mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah, what is it, Elijah or something? It was like I'm not in the wind and I'm not in the storm. I'm in the still small voice or whatever.
Yeah.
Those were things that kept us going back to, okay, I just have to listen harder. I have to fast longer. I have to, still myself even deeper.
Yeah,
or
exactly.
there's sin in my life, or there's something come between us, and he's withholding his voice as a way to get my attention, to discipline those he loves.
Oh my God, that's so dysfunctional and
Right?
abusive.
Well, I'm
Oh,
I'm triggering, right?
yeah.
Wow.
So, Steve, I'm trolling you on Facebook, and there's a couple of pictures here with you're with a large group of men your age. And do you have that kind of community? That looks like a really fun group of guys.
So there's a couple groups of friends that have been pretty cool. One of them was a reunion. So when I first graduated high school, I went to Washington State University for 1 year.
Okay.
And then right after that, I went to Trinity Lutheran College and ended up, finishing there. But at Washington State University, I was in crisis, and I hope I don't derail into a long story that, I shouldn't, but, just to kind of give context. So, God, you asked me a simple question. Yes, they're great. They're great friends. So the college guys, the ones from Wazoo, I hadn't seen them in like 17 years, and we had a reunion a couple years ago, and got together and went to a football game, and that was pretty fun. But there's a group of like 4 of us that would go to Oktoberfest every year, a separate group of guys, and I don't know which picture you're looking at, but
yeah, both.
They're good friends, like the 4 guys that I hang out with. We'll go to Buffalo Wild Wings every March and watch the basketball games that Thursday and Friday, and so we have a lot of fun doing that.
Well, and I was telling Marie before we got on the line here with you that you and I, our journeys are just parallel lines, and I too am a March Madness freak, and I get lost in Netflix, like I saw in your bio, and all of that. But one thing, I started this show because of how painful and difficult and lonely leaving the faith was, and you also found yourself in a situation. And the reason I say this in the context of talking about these guy friends is that we need community. I think some of us more than others, but the community that has formed around this show has turned out to be amazing. So first of all, talk a little bit about your podcast. And then secondly, what are some of the benefits that have come, especially even maybe the unforeseen benefits?
Yeah, that's a great question. So something just to lead into what you had started with saying about needing to start the podcast for yourself, for community, something that I kind of came to understand over the years after I deconverted was, we had a dinner party with some friends. They invited us over, with some other couples, and we didn't know them too well at the time, but it was all atheists, and most of us were ex-Christian. And so the person who put on the party, he was trying to build community and kind of bring people together. And we were sitting around, we just chatted about everything, but we were sitting around the table at one point, and I was like dying to know like everyone's story, like what they went through, because I think I needed that, and I actually still think I need that. And that's why I did the podcast. But what's funny is people would kind of give their brief bio or story, and then they start talking about something else. And I was just like, am I the only one who wants to talk about these things?
Well, there's just no trauma there for them.
Perhaps, or they were just ready to move on quicker.
Okay. All right.
So that was one of the first signs that like I needed to talk about these things. Another sign was when I was listening to your podcast and I was hearing these conversations, and I'm just like dying to have them,
Yeah.
And just thinking like I need to have these conversations, not just for myself, but I think you talked about the benefits of starting it. So like you, it's huge. Just hearing from people through email or through Twitter, sending messages saying thank you so much or for these stories.
Yeah.
That is it's very healing, to have gone through something tough, to try to do something to help and know that it's working. That's really healing.
Yeah, for sure. So what's the name of your podcast, and how can people find it? We'll just throw that in here.
Yeah. Voices of Deconversion, and it's voicesofdeconversion.com. You can find me on Twitter at VOD Podcast. So either of those ways, Facebook as well.
Do you happen to remember what year, maybe the first time that you heard one of my episodes?
Well, I know for sure. So I had gotten a new job in it was end of 2014. I know for sure it was 2015 for sure.
Okay. Yeah.
Because I was listening to it commuting like an hour to work, and I remember listening to a lot of them. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really funny when you think of like people in their daily life, like going for a jog or like driving to work and listening to your show. It's really funny.
Yeah.
Well, here's something you might relate to is that because I've 200 and some episodes now and almost 5 years of doing it, there are a lot of people who really do know me. Like, I'm pretty transparent on the damn show, and they know me. And so when I either run into them or, maybe get an email from them, they know me. But it's very one-sided because I don't know them.
Isn't that funny?
Yeah, and you just have to, kind of roll with that. And then, of course, since then, I've become friends with, now I know them back, and there's been a lot of relationships built. But, I mean, have you found that, like, people, because they listen to your voice, and there's something very intimate about earbuds, I'm convinced. I mean, and just talking, you're up in their ears, and especially like on a commute like that or something, it feels intimate. Yeah. And you get to know that person. And I feel like I'm friends with Mark Maron and he doesn't know shit about me.
That is so true though. Like I listened to, it was the Nerdist, now it's ID10T podcast with Chris Hardwick. Uh-huh. And I feel like I know, like he's a friend, and he's this guy I've never met. And it is really funny that way. And when I've talked to people on the podcast, there are times definitely when some of them, maybe have listened to a part of a show or something, but some have listened to like every episode. And I think, wow, I've done like about 57, and I'm thinking if they've listened to all those, like I put in a little bits and pieces about myself in each of the episodes as things come up. And so, they get to know you really well. And you start thinking like, what did I say in some episode way back that maybe was embarrassing, or maybe I shouldn't have said, that they now know and I've forgotten,
Yeah. So how's it worked out for your boys? They're teenagers now, so they've, they were kind of raised in it. Yeah. Maybe a little bit of indoctrination. How much exposure, and then how much difficulty has it been for them to find their own way?
Yeah, it's been really interesting because in a way it's been kind of like a case study or something for us, because we were both raised religious. So they don't remember religion. They don't remember church. They were 2 or 3 years old when we stopped praying with them. Yeah. Huh. And I've mentioned this on my podcast before, but when I deconverted and when I stopped praying with them at night, it was this weird feeling of like I'm harming them through neglect. Like I'm not giving them something they should be having as innocent little children, and I'm holding it back from them. And that was a weird feeling. That was not comfortable, But of course, over time, they grow up and like, it's no big deal to them. They're not really interested in this whole religion, deconversion, atheist, any of that. Yeah. Mm-hmm. They just are living their lives. They have interests, like my oldest is into choir, and he's thought about being a counselor. And then my youngest is really into computers. And so it's, they're kind of just doing what you kind of think you would have wanted to do if you hadn't had religion. Just focus on your interests and, you know. So it's been interesting to see them grow up without it. But they're great people, and that's what's also really exciting and encouraging, is knowing, look, here's an example of 2 kids that they're human, they have faults, but they're good people. And it's neat to think, you don't need, it's neat to see it in real life, that you don't need a God or a religion to make you good,
Amen.
How did you adjust through losing or getting rid of religion while in the midst of raising your kids? And then, that's the way that you were raised. Like, did you have to, or did you choose to research ways to raise a secular child? Like, did you find yourself speechless and like aimless, or did it just kind of come natural to you for a while, just to kind of just be a good parent, but without religion? Or how did you navigate that?
Yeah, it definitely didn't come natural. I read Parenting Beyond Belief. That was in like probably sometime around 2007 or 2008. And that was just 2 or 3 years after deconverting. So the kids are still 4 or 5 years old, they're little. And I read that book. I was reading God Delusion. I was trying to find resources, and honestly, I wasn't finding them.
Who wrote Parenting Beyond Belief?
Dale McCowan.
Yeah, that's right. We've had him on. Yeah.
Yeah. It helped. But one of the things that was, I think, the hardest for me was, how do I talk about death with my kids?
Yep.
Because I can't tell them the fairy tale ends, or there's a fairy tale ending anymore.
Mm-hmm.
It's just over. And they're little, you know, and you're like, well, how much do I tell a 5 or 6 year old about that? And it came up once. So my wife was sitting there talking to my oldest, and he was probably 5 or 6, and her dad passed away when she was when she was a teenager. So he was asking about grandma, and they said, well, you know, where's grandpa, or where's your dad? And she said, well, my dad, he died. And Ryan goes, well, what happens when you die? And this is when we had just deconverted. So I was very much of the opinion, don't expose them to religious thinking because it will hurt them later. Because that happened for me. But she was still kind of more like newly had come through that. So she just goes, well, you go to heaven. And I was doing this like, you know, like, no, stop, you know, like behind his back, like, don't say it, you know. And it kind of, somehow we kind of transitioned the conversation, as you can with toddlers, you know, or young kids. And so it kind of ended there. And to my knowledge, it didn't really come up after that. But that's a really good example of how hard it was for us to adjust to this parenting thing when you don't have religion to kind of guide you.
Yeah. I can see that scene. I just re-dramatize it in the kitchen, and, you know, da-da-da-da-da. And he says, so what happens when you die? And then, like, insert screech music from a horror film. Exactly. You know, and your eyes bulge out, and you and your wife make eye contact, and, you know, what do we do? And then when she begins to open her mouth, and it's in slow-mo, and she says, you go to heaven, and you're like, no.
Oh, yeah. Exactly. That's exactly how it was. Oh,
well, let me talk about death for a second. I mean, death is way up in my face because my dearest friend, Dave Warnock, has been diagnosed with ALS, and he has maybe a year or two to live. We don't know. It's very progressive at this point. And it's unavoidable. You know, it's just, you have to face it. Honestly, I think I know him well enough to take him at his word. I know that it'll still be a little scary as the seconds are approaching. But he says, look, what is wrong with going to sleep and never waking up? That sounds easy. That's not hard, nor is it scary.
Wow.
And he says it with a lot of confidence, so we'll see.
Yeah, there's a Mark Twain quote, and I'm not going to remember it, but it's something to the effect of, like, I didn't care much about not being here before I was born. I'm not going to really care when I'm gone, you know?
Right. For sure.
Yeah. And I totally butchered the quote, but it's something to that effect. And yeah, like when you think about it that way, I can be at peace with it. 'Cause obviously if you're not here, you're not going to know and whatever. But for me, it's leading up to that, you know, for everyone, I'm sure, like, that's hard. And I actually, recently got diagnosed with, thyroid cancer. So I kind of had my own little scare.
Whoa.
Yeah. And that was really hard to cope with. So, like, you guys having heard my history, like, I ignore the problem. So I was just trying everything I could do to just forget about it, not think about it, you know?
You mean ignore the symptoms?
No, because there weren't any, but they just happened to find it through like a CAT scan. I went in for a different thing, and they did a CT scan and then said, oh, there's like a nodule on your thyroid, you know? But the fortunate thing is it's like highly survivable, and there's a good outlook, like a good, you know, prognosis. So that's really good. But from the time that I was told, yeah, you got like an 80% chance it's cancer, to the time that I had the surgery, you know, there was all these unknowns. Like, when they do the surgery, like, they could damage your vocal cord, you know, like every surgery, any complication. And so it was really scary. And then it started me thinking, like, okay, I'm an atheist now. Like, this is really interesting to be facing this type of thing with, you know, with different eyes, like looking at it differently. But yeah, I can't imagine. I think I'm going to be okay, but I can't imagine going through something like a life-threatening, like, knowing that you don't have much time. I think I'm not sure I'd handle it that well.
Yeah, it's tough to imagine.
Yeah.
I feel like my journey has led me to just constantly be aware of that. And sometimes I'm jealous of people who don't really think about it very often. And I feel like, I don't know if it's like chemical or just the way that I am, but I think about it every day. Like Cass, when you said that sometimes at moments you forget that Dave is dying and then you kind of just remember it all over again. Like, the experiences that I have is like I'm constantly aware. Like, I know I could die today. I know I could die tomorrow. I know that I have nothing guaranteed at all. And it makes me very anxious to be aware of that constantly. And I don't know. I think it causes a lot of discomfort. And at the same time, I feel like, I don't know what the right words are because it's not a blessing, but there are good things that can come from it. Mm-hmm. Like just the awareness of, like Cass, what you say all the time about like being aware of death and accepting death can make life that much more sweet and at times bittersweet.
Yeah. But
that you can really enjoy the moments that you have and you can take things less seriously.
Yeah.
I really like that. And I'm going to bring something up that probably would have come up later, but you always ask about movies or things you're watching, and you know that I love talking about Netflix movies and stuff. So,
sure.
Have you seen the Bill Murray stories?
Yes.
Okay. So when Marie, you said that about like living, it makes you live life in the moment. I'm kind of a controlling person, I think, and I try to plan things. And so when things don't go accordingly, it could be devastating for me. Well, watching Bill Murray in this documentary, just living in the moment, showing up to a house party just randomly, or popping into someone's wedding photo, and just being carefree and wearing not very like nice looking clothes. Doesn't look like he ironed his clothes or like he's just wearing whatever. They don't match.
He's all out of fucks.
Yeah. And he doesn't care. And I was like watching this thinking like, I need that. I need some of that in my life. And I think if you can take the death thing and turn it into that, I think for me, that's a goal, you know?
Yeah. When I hear you say, that sometimes it makes you anxious, Marie, then I think about, because we're talking about the scarcity of a commodity makes it precious. Once you realize that your death is impending and unavoidable and can happen at any time, it makes time and the ticking of time precious. So let's say it's the day before your wedding, or you have a big exam tomorrow or today, and this is an anxious thing for anybody. And so because it's a big deal and I need for this to go well, I need to capitalize on this opportunity. I need to do well on this exam, then anxiety is there. Well, if you took that fucking exam every day, then after a while, you know, you'd have to back off the anxiety, or you'd have a big hole in your stomach wide enough for a Mack truck. And, you know, so this is what we do, is that we get up every day, and every day is our wedding day, you know, so like we do have to make the best of this. Now, I'm just saying that because of the redundancy of it, that there is a built-in mechanism to help us back the fuck off, because just out of survival, we can't be that anxious or that careful, full of care, 24/7. And so a little bit, it's moderation, right? Just a little bit of complacency and a little bit of relaxedness has to be there in order for us to be sane, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have to kind of balance the planning of life with like just going with the flow, you know?
Exactly. Yeah. So you just make your point about Bill Murray and maybe what you were referring to. I don't know if it's OCD, but like you need things to go well, and so you want to have it planned. You're not going to go on a family vacation and wing it.
Yeah,
right?
No, exactly. And we have one coming up, and I planned like every part of that thing.
Yeah, right. That's you. But if you stick to those guns, and the bus that you were supposed to take to the mountaintop is late, then you're gonna freak the fuck out, and you're gonna ruin the trip or at least that afternoon for your kids and wife.
Yeah.
So you have to also say, all right, the bus is late. It's gonna be okay, and you know you have to do both. It's both.
And it's ironic too, because I was thinking about that as I couldn't download Chrome and get onto the Zencaster thing, and I'm thinking, Steve, just like it's okay. Like if it doesn't work out, if for some reason it gets canceled or something, like like, you'll talk to them again, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But I still can't. It's still hard, you know? You're still, like, freaking out, like, oh, I've got to do this thing, you know?
That's so true. So here's my point about Bill Murray. As I am an enormous Bill Murray fan. He's literally my number one celebrity hero that I want to model my life after. So when I watched that, I was completely, and I'd heard all those stories, you know, where he shows up in Ten's bar at South by Southwest and just, you know, all those spontaneous things, living in the moment. And I love that about him, you know, and you see these little stickers on people's cars and stuff. I've got one of those, of his face. So here's the thing, as I'm watching that though, and the devil's advocate in me knows that he's had, I think, 3 wives, and he's got 6 children to whoever many wives. There was a couple of the children that were interviewed, and so they agreed to come on, and you know, they were supportive of their dad being this wild weirdo. But he also left them, you know.
Interesting.
And so I was coming from the perspective of, like, I bet we could talk to a couple of his ex-wives that would have something to say about his spontaneity or his lack of commitment or his lack of planning or his he's all out of fucks, or, you know, it just made me say, I love this guy, and I would like to see maybe a documentary of the other side or something, just to find the balance, not perfection, but at least some kind of balance.
I think that's really interesting. It's good to keep the balance in there between, like, you know, you've talked about on your podcast about, like, hero worship or turning people into heroes or idols too much, you know, and having been a fundamentalist, hardcore Christian myself, like, it was just all or nothing. And I think that is a really good lesson to keep in mind. Like, everything has a balance to it. Like, you should be carefree, but you got to plan some stuff. You know, you can't just, like, live life like that. Yeah. And there's consequences to it.
Yeah.
I want to go back to the Mark Twain quote because it made me think of something I've never thought about before. Something? Did I just say something? So we say pre-death. You know, we don't have any memories of our pre-birth. And so that's what's going to be post-death. It's just nothing. We don't remember it at all. And I think one of the reasons why that may not be as comforting as it should is that as a baby, we don't remember shit until we're like 2 years into this life.
Yeah.
So the fact that we don't remember our pre-birth, I mean, we understand that that's, because we didn't exist. We weren't sperm and ovum yet. We hadn't begun the cell division of our exploding cells. And yet on this end, we are fully conscious and cognizant. All our cells are formed. And so we hit the back end of life running, you know, whereas we enter the world completely small and needy and dependent and really non-conscious. So maybe the reason that we find it hard to fully imagine post-death being the exact same as pre-birth is that we're nowhere close to the same person that we were when we entered this earth. I don't know.
He's saying, like, it becomes urgent to like, we're running at the end, meaning, like, we realize that the end's coming, and so we're kind of having to try to live life to the fullest as fast as we can, kind of thing?
No, I'm just saying that if somebody finds that statement that you quoted by Mark Twain, where I'm not scared of my post-death because I wasn't scared of my pre-birth, or, you know, nothing, it's nothingness. And if that lacks the comfort that it should bear, it might be because we give our baby selves a lot of, sure, we didn't exist, but now we do exist, and to go back into non-existence where our cells then begin to deconstruct and decompose.
Yeah.
I don't know.
There's a loss on this end.
Right.
How so?
There's no loss coming into existence.
Exactly. That's maybe in a nutshell what I'm theorizing. Yeah.
Well, I'm curious, how do you guys cope with that idea, that thought, death? You know, I know, Cash, you start every podcast with "I'm going to die."
That's just to keep it on the forefront. I'm just trying to not compartmentalize it too much. I think the denial of death is the reason for all wars and religions and racism. So.
Yeah.
You go first, Marie.
Oh, God. So I'm trying to cope the best that I can. I have a lot of death anxiety. Some former fundamentalists don't. I have a lot. I think about it every day, like I mentioned, and I am constantly trying to find ways to cope with it or to spin a narrative that seems intellectually honest and somewhat comforting, and or build up like emotional resilience against it. But I think, to be honest, like the phrase "say yes to what is" has been really helpful for me, and I saw that in action the last couple of months, like when my cat died, which was just kind of like a mirror of my own death, like having to deal with someone that I love dying, and seeing how walking through that space while saying just say yes to what is was actually worked out really well, because it was horrifying and I was terrified of losing her, and at the same time reality was happening and I chose to accept it, and feelings were through the roof and so painful, and I was crying every day and stressed beyond belief, and I said yes, that this is what's happening, and I'm going to confront what's happening, and I'm going to respond to the reality of what is and make plans based on that, and not fight what I know to be true about this circumstance. And so that's, I guess, maybe like what you were saying, Cass, about taking the same test every day. The test will get easier. I try to expose myself to this test of preparing for death or getting comfortable with death or just accepting it by, obviously up till now, just talking about it. I don't go around killing people that I love just to see how I would cope.
Okay.
Like, that doesn't seem like a
That's
really
good.
great plan.
Way to go.
So I don't do that, but I did kill my cat, but she was dying anyway. But like going through that with her actually was really helpful. Like I found that I had a lot more resiliency than I thought that I did. Especially, like I said, through this phrase of saying yes to accepting the reality that is, because then you can honestly engage with that and spend less time engaging in suppressing your feelings or pushing away the reality or denying it. So exposure, experience helps, and talking about it a lot. I usually don't have friends in my life that, if they can't talk about death or sex, I usually don't have them as a friend because those topics are so important to me. And I think that they're the biggest topics for me, mostly because people don't talk about either one. So that's how I cope with my impending death. What about you, Cass?
Well, just like we were talking about the wedding or the test is a daily thing. I think going to sleep every night is a daily practice of dying. And so if we could, just take you through an exercise, close your eyes. No, I'm just kidding. No, but just imagine, like, right, just this morning, which only happened a few hours ago, we woke up and found ourselves, sometimes if you're at a hotel or you're staying at a friend's and you first wake up and you're like, where am I? It's not familiar. Waking up is that moment where you're like, oh, okay, yeah, I'm here, I'm me, this is my bed, this is my house, this is my job, I got to get ready to go. Well, that's not going to happen. Like one day you're going to go to sleep and never are you going to snap out of it. And so my question, I think, and what maybe I hear in Steve's question is, how does that make you feel? Are you ready for that? And what I'm saying about my friend Dave is that he's like, I'm ready for that. In fact, it kind of sounds good. And I know he's not a silver lining type seeker, but he did say, Trump's no longer my problem.
That's so funny.
So Dave.
There is a lot about life that we do. I mean, what depressed people do most is sleep. Because it is an escape from like the hard shit that is like beaming down on us, like hot sun rays. We want out, and so go to bed, go to sleep. Unconsciousness is a wonderful respite from certain anxieties. And so anyway, I'm not there yet. I'm not necessarily with the enthusiasm that Dave is, and especially given the reality. Mine's a little exercise in experimentation. His is real.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the thing that's hard, yeah.
All right, so one last thing about death that came up when you were talking, Steve, about your children and the question of what do we tell the children. And it never had occurred to me until you said this, and so I'm just going to throw this out, and this may not mean anything to anybody, but I found it interesting. Why is it, or do we assume that the children are going to find the absence of an afterlife strange, or in and of their natural selves, without indoctrination or cultural sway, would they find the afterlife narratives silly or fantastical? Like, I think we default to saying, oh my gosh, how are we going to tell the kids that there's no afterlife? Well, what if in their natural core, in their natural essence, they're not actually expecting or looking for an afterlife, and then when we come up with one, it's like, oh, that we fill that void, that we answer a question that they're not asking. Is that?
Yeah. I think you're right. I think as far as that goes, that if they never know about it, it's kind of like with my kids now. They didn't really know church or Christianity, so it's no big deal to them. But
no,
any of that.
Yeah.
What?
I'm sorry to laugh, but I'm just imagining, let's say we're in a culture that's completely secular and your kids are at school and there's this one little strange family that has these beliefs, and the kids have just grown up unindoctrinated. And then somehow it comes up in the cafeteria that the kids say, oh no, yeah, we're actually going to live forever. And everybody looks at them funny. And like, what?
Yeah.
I mean, wouldn't it be great if that was the strange story?
Yeah, it makes no sense. The harder thing for me is just like, how do you tell a little kid, like, someday you're not going to be here anymore, Yep. That's what's hard. But the fantasy, if you don't tell them the fantasy, they just never know it. It's like not telling them about Santa Claus, They just wouldn't think anything of it.
Yeah.
I mean, so I don't have kids, right? But like my theory around it is that kids will accept whatever you fucking tell them. It's
they're
us.
Blank slates. Yeah.
Yeah, it's us who are uncomfortable with the truth. It brings up for me the idea of the argument about how am I going to explain to my kids that these two men are married? How am I going to tell them that? You just fucking tell them. You accept the reality and you fucking tell them.
It's so funny, right? When they ask those questions.
Yeah.
How do I tell them? I'll just tell them.
You're the one with the hang up.
I think you're right. Yeah, like you said, your friends, they have to be okay talking about sex and death. And, it's people who have the hang-ups that can't talk about those things,
Honestly, I think that the absence or the lack or the fear of talking about those two subjects is what gives us people not only like Trump, but that people that need Trump. And it creates xenophobia. Anyway, it's a little bit of a journey to unpack that, but this absence or the lack of talking about death and sex is killing society. It's the reason America sucks right now.
Well, and I think, Marie, like what you were saying about accepting the reality of your cat passing, like, I think that message of acceptance is something, we're talking about really heavy stuff. And I have lived with depression and for a while, and luckily I'm medicated, and I've gone to a therapist and been able to kind of work through a lot. But being someone who tends to be that way, this can be really hard to talk about.
Yeah.
Even if you're healthy. Yeah. And I think your message of acceptance of reality, that's something not just with death, but when I look back at my life and the different paths I could have taken, it's something I find that it's like the number one thing I need to learn is acceptance of life, acceptance of things that happen. Yeah.
It's the best thing that's ever happened to me, and it's all Cass's fault. Like, because it's a great motto, and it applies to so many things, and it helps me be more grounded and real about what's happening to me, and more loving to myself. Yep. Like, it's really hard to hate yourself when you say yes to who you are. Yep. When it's hard to beat yourself up for your feelings when you say, yes, these are feelings that I have. This is what reality is. Now what? Like, instead of fighting yourself all the time.
Well, and I credit Friedrich Nietzsche and Eckhart Tolle for brainwashing me with that stuff. But it changed my life. Amor fati, a love of fate, love of what is, that which you cannot control. You can throw tantrums, you can bury your head in the sand, you can plug your ears and la 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 la, but it's right there waiting for you when you wake the fuck up.
Yeah.
Yeah, what's great too is like, Marie, you were saying that it created compassion for yourself, and that's huge. I need that as well. But also, I think it creates compassion for others who maybe they infuriate you. Maybe it's a Trump supporter who like just is getting under your skin really bad, and they just seem like a hateful, mean person. But like when you realize in the grand scheme of things, like it's all going to end, like, you know, how do you approach that now? Like, how do you approach people who maybe you really disagree with or even maybe dislike? Like, I think it creates more compassion in us. You know, this kind of thought that life's temporary and we need to just accept kind of how life is and just try to, you know, be nice to each other while we're here, you know, that kind of thing.
Amen.
Yeah. Yeah, you know what? It's super challenging because this reminds me of, like, I went out to supper with my younger sister the other day, and she's also a deconvert, but less traumatized than myself. And we were talking about life purpose. She's working on reconstructing her life and what is she doing with her life in the absence of religion, in the absence of a big narrative. And I told her my experience in that I find a lot of satisfaction in what I do. Like, I find satisfaction in creating the relationships that make me happy while I'm alive. I find satisfaction in making my body feel good, whatever that looks like. And I find satisfaction in being a part of this podcast and helping to heal or at least create conversations around recovering from religion. I find a lot of meaning and fulfillment in that. And at the same time, I have a brain that can't stop thinking about the endlessness of time. And I just keep thinking, okay, this is great what I'm doing here with my short amount of time on the earth. And also, we're going to be gone before you know it. Like, not just me, but everyone. We're all, like, everything's going to be gone. And none of this matters. And so we can talk about purpose all day long. We can talk about being kind to people. And I just can't stop thinking about, like, none of this matters. Like, and I don't know what kind of perspective or philosophy that is, but it's hard not to think about that, you know, creating as much purpose as you can for yourself and wanting to invest in your community and your country and the nation and the environment is all wonderful. And it's not that I'm not going to do it, but I'm so aware of all of it all ending like, and not mattering at all. Another friend of mine was recently talking about his desire to create a legacy with his life, to make an impact, to you know, to have people know his name. And I thought, and then what? And then those people all die. Like, how written into history do you want to be? This is all going away.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's just like another tangent on it. But that's where my mind goes when I talk about purpose. I can't stop thinking about time going forward.
Yeah, and I think like that, like in keeping with kind of what we're saying about acceptance, like when I hear that, I have to just accept that and say like, okay, yes, that's true. And that's definitely a thought. You know, I have those thoughts too. And I need to just affirm that. I can't just move past that and go, yeah, but make meaning out of your life now.
Yeah. But
in affirming that, then saying, okay, well, I have to focus on something.
Yep.
I think that is kind of a nihilistic, or I don't know if I'm saying that right, but yeah, like a nihilistic view of nothing really matters. And like Bill Murray says it in multiple movies, you know?
It just doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter.
Yeah, so I guess just, I don't know. That's a tough one for me too. I guess I'll just say that.
Yeah.
I think it's just healthy nihilism.
Yeah.
You know, it is nihilism, or acknowledging that it doesn't matter. And we're going ahead and making something matter in our little lives and this little blip that we represent. But yeah, in the long run, nobody's going to remember this 100 years from now.
Well, I'll just say something really quick. You talked about kids and like telling them there's, you know, we talked about how I had told my kids there's no afterlife, you know, no heaven. And then we're talking about how everything's going to end. Something that gave me peace as I worked through like how to raise my kids and there not being an eternity was thinking of the fact, and maybe this is more philosophical, but it helps me. The idea that like, if I treat my kids kindly, you know, if overall I'm a decent parent and I love them and I show them kindness and pass on, healthy traditions or whatever. The legacy is love, so you're passing on that love to those kids. And when you're gone, that love's still with them. So you kind of gave that to them, then they give it to their kids in theory, right? And I think I look back at all of my ancestors, all of my, grandparents and think they passed something on to their kids who passed it on to me. And I try to think like that's eternal, and of course humanity may end, but as long as humanity's here, maybe that's our legacy, is to just pass that on, and maybe our name won't be written on it, or we won't have a tower or a wall to put our name on, but we'll have that legacy of love that we passed through. And so that kind of helped me when I was working through some of that.
Yep.
I like that. I like that a lot.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Well, yeah, Marie, those things that you listed as far as the guy wanting to leave a legacy, those are straight out of the book, Denial of Death, that people want to get a Guinness Book of World Record or a gold medal or have children. Those are immortality projects.
That's a good way to put it.
Have your name on a statue or a college dorm named after you. These are all desires for the fearful, to somehow kick and scratch and keep their heads above water in as far as their own sense of self, I guess I should say.
Yeah.
Well, Steve, I'm sorry I've just completely ramrodded you this whole talk. This was supposed to be an interview of you, and we've just made it a three-way conversation where you're probably the least contributing.
No, don't even say that. It was totally awesome. I really enjoyed the conversation, and it's fine. I mean, my story's on my podcast, episode 17. So if anyone wants to hear the whole 2-hour thing, they can always tune in for that.
Yeah. And Voices of Deconversion. And you had me on, and this is what we've been doing lately since Marie took over managing the lineups and stuff. She's had me on shows, and we have reciprocated and things like this. So I said to the last guy, I said, well, now we've performed 69 position on each other, so we're good.
And Steve, can you tell us about your show just briefly, in that, we already have our listeners to our show, and they're hearing us promote another show that's very similar. Can you tell us about the similarities and the differences between Everyone's Agnostic and Voices of Deconversion, so that people can know, if they're interested?
Sure, yeah. So
number one, the interviewer lets other people talk.
Oh, stop it. That's so funny. No, so kind of the phrase that I kind of just tried to develop, and I'm not good at this, but it was just encouraging atheist and agnostic ex-Christians with inspiring stories of deconversion. So I find every story really inspiring to me and encouraging. So it's basically just bringing on someone who deconverted from Christianity, who, they're either atheist or agnostic, or sometimes they're free thinkers or humanist or something. Sometimes it can be kind of in that gray area. But I felt like there aren't enough podcasts where atheists and agnostics get to have their voice heard, like on this show. A lot of times it's like liberal Christians or people who are still really spiritual or something. And I just felt like we don't have a place to land. Like when you deconvert from Christianity, you can't just go become a Hindu, or you could, but the people that we're interviewing aren't, they don't have, they can't go become Buddhist or something. Like they're left with this void, and what do you do now? And so
totally.
Yeah. So basically just let them tell their story, and I interject and kind of share things about my life along the way. But as far as differences go, I mean, it's really similar, as far as that goes. I think it's funny because I talked about me being controlling, and I think I kind of have this set, let's start chronologically with early years and move all the way through, where I think I'm Cass is really good at just kind of going with the flow, and I'm not.
I know.
So that's that control thing again, but I guess it's similar in a sense, and in sharing the stories, Yeah.
Well, everybody's got one, and there's no shortage of them. And you know what? Just about the time that we think, okay, everybody that has deconverted is done, and they're healed, and they don't need the show anymore, there's a whole nother wave of people that are just starting their deconstruction, and they're scared shitless, and so it starts all over.
Yeah, I think you mentioned it. You kind of have people kind of cycle in and cycle out.
Yep.
And I'm finding a lot of people, I'll get an email I just deconverted last year, and then a year later, I just deconverted last year, just keeps coming.
You know what I love about our podcast, at least our types of podcasts, and the way that I see it anyway, is that my goal has never been to just indefinitely grow listenership. I'm not super obsessed with
hitting a certain number or anything. Like, my goal has always been that I want as many people who want to know about this or who want to listen to this to be able to listen to this. And if that's, 1,200 people, I'm perfectly content. You know what I mean? Like, I just don't need it to grow indefinitely, and I don't need people to keep listening either. Like, if people aren't interested anymore or that's just not striking them anymore, like, that's cool. Like,
yeah,
I don't know. I like that. I like that view of what we are, that we're not clinging to our listeners,
Yeah, it's here for a purpose, to help people through that process. And for me, like, I still listen to Everyone's Agnostic. So, like, I've deconverted. I've got my own podcast and I'm doing my own thing, but I still listen to it. Like, it still gives me something. And I know there's listeners like that, but there's also a lot of people who cycle through. And I think you're right. Like, it's just nice knowing, like, this is the role we play, and that's fine. And we're good with it. And it helps who it helps.
Yeah.
I know it was easier for me to do that once I gave up on it being a source of income. Like, as far as, like, can I make a living being a podcaster? Then, yeah, I care about the numbers and, bust ass. And then you realize, okay, it's not going to happen. So you relax into just, okay, yeah, whatever it is. And in fact, at this point, if we worked ourselves out of a job, meaning the whole world became so deconverted and so healthy and Christianity went the fuck away, then we could shut it down or talk about something else.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Talk about sex and death every week, which we kind of do anyway. But
those would get lots of listeners.
Yeah. Oh, they would.
Sex and death.
They do like that.
As you know, Steve, on the way out, we have a couple of personal questions. And how about is something unique about yourself that maybe very few, if anybody, knows about you?
Yeah, I thought about this one, and it was really hard. And I asked my wife, and the first thing I was going to say is I like foreign movies, which is
okay
for some people. They shake their head and don't get it, and other people are like, "Oh, that's cool."
You must be a fast reader because those will be subtitled, right?
Yeah. Sometimes I can't keep up, but I do pretty good.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I don't know what it is about like foreign movies, but they're different. It's a different culture.
Sure.
There's a movie on Netflix right now called The Kingdom, and it's like based in Japan, and it's totally different. So it's interesting to me. But I found that I really like foreign language in general. So I took French in high school. When I was in the Trinity Lutheran College, I took a year of Hebrew, which I can't remember much of either of those things anymore. But I'm just finding that I have an interest in that. My kids are taking German, and I'm really into hearing about how it's going with them. And so I think that's something that I wouldn't probably bring up at like a dinner party if like I didn't know people very well. Yeah. But we're in a trusting space here, so.
Well, do you feel homogenized by not exposing yourself to other cultures, or?
I just think I like it because it's unique, and then maybe I'll learn something different or have a different perspective if I watch, a movie from a different culture or a different country. Like I'll get a different perspective. So I think that's kind of what the appeal is.
So if you go to Baskin Robbins, what kind of ice cream do you get?
Well, when it comes to ice cream, it's got to be chocolate every time. Okay,
see that's a contradiction in my mind as far as like that. I mean, not a bad way, but it's like, okay, I was, when I say homogenized, I'm like, okay, he really doesn't want to get stuck in one vanilla or in this case, chocolate, but you do want, and when it comes to your taste buds. Yeah,
it's true. Yeah. Like if I go get a milkshake, I'll think about, I was telling someone this the other day, actually, I'll think about strawberry, I'll think about vanilla and be like, oh, that would probably be good. And like, nope, I want chocolate.
Are you familiar with the conservative brain kind of concept?
Maybe. I don't know. So
it might be Jonathan Haidt. I can't remember. But like it's in general, you have a conservative brain, or you have your worldview, or the lens through which you see things, or you need the world to have structure, or I don't know. I'm not one, so it's hard for me to emphasize.
Tradition or like routine.
Yeah.
Yeah, traditions, different things, and in that sense, it's a person that my wife has a conservative brain. There's almost a FOMO, a fear of missing out when it comes to other cultures. So if she can expose herself to other cultures, like you're saying, just watching another culture is fascinating to her because it's like, wow, just on, another part of the planet they literally live and think and breathe and eat differently than us. That's fascinating.
I agree with that. It is fascinating, but I think that there is the part of me that wants my routine too. You know, it's kind of this contradiction. Yeah.
Yeah. Both and. Marie, why don't you ask him something he's proud of, and I'll take that up.
Now who's controlling? So, Steve, I was just randomly thinking, what is something that what's something that you're proud of?
Wow, I didn't see that question coming at all. Yeah, well, in thinking about that, like I'm proud. I know I've heard other people say it on this podcast, but I'm proud that I made it through this whole process.
Yeah.
I didn't get into it much, but I struggled a lot with, I talked about depression, but I was even really suicidal at one point. And the best thing I ever did was get medicated and go to therapy.
Yep.
It changed my perspective on everything. I mean, I was like hopeless and feeling like, it was bleak, and then you get healthy and it's better. So it was the best thing I ever did. But so I'm proud that I was able to get through that and not on my own. I mean, my wife has been so supportive and so wonderful in all of this. And then of course my kids, like just seeing my kids grow up and, seeing that they're healthy.
Yeah.
They're human, like I said, but they're relatively okay. And that makes me really happy to know my wife and I went through some tough stuff, but to see my kids okay is a big deal, and it makes you really proud.
That's awesome.
Absolutely. There's a story where you went down that dark path, and we're not having this conversation right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's a multi-universe where you're not here.
Well,
and we're not having this talk.
Yeah.
So thank you. I'm proud of you too.
Well, and you had shared something about your own experience on one of your podcast casts, and that it meant a lot to me to hear it. Yeah. When you hear another human being talk about something hard they went through, it makes you go, "Oh man, like I'm not alone." Cliche but true. Yeah.
Well, and there's a machoism or maybe some form of like bootstraps or some kind of tough it out. And when you admit, like I wanted to take myself out, I wanted out, and it feels cowardly. It feels like a baby or a tantrum or chicken shit or something deplorable. And so, it's hard to say, and especially, I was reading something this week that went around, and the quote was something along the lines of, the life you're living right now is a dream for many people. And so there's an entitlement, or there's not an entitlement, the opposite of entitlement. There's I have a billion things going for me, and yet I want out, and I'm just saying there's a lot of reasons to feel shame about having that feeling and keep it to yourself.
Yeah. And
so again, the expanding the talkaboutable, putting it out there, I don't know if I can think of one good reason that we as a culture and as a species shouldn't talk about everything.
Yeah.
Like nothing is off the table. The more we talk about it, the healthier we get, the more the light shines on it, the less the fear controls us. And then we realize, oh God, everybody's as fucked up as me, or everybody's as scared to death as me, or everybody's as horny as me. All these things that we are ashamed to talk about. In fact, there was a tweet that went around yesterday, and I know it was a joke, but the guy said, it's disgusting that we have to trim our fingernails and toenails. We're better than this.
That's awesome.
And I thought, there it is. There is that drive to despise what it means to be human, which Christianity absolutely feeds. And it's toxic. And it's, I think, what you were saying about your boys is that they grew up just being themselves, and there never was like a hole for them to climb out of. Because they didn't start with original sin. They didn't start from a default position that needed judgment and salvation. They started as just humans being humans, and there ain't nothing wrong with it.
Yeah.
Yeah, isn't it crazy that our species evolved to this point? Like, evolving language was probably one of the greatest things in our species, and we've achieved so much by having a shared way of communicating and being able to talk about the abstract or the hypothetical. And then we get to this point where we have so many words and so many languages to be able to communicate such complex topics. And then now we go backwards by saying, yeah, but not this topic.
Yeah.
And not that topic.
Interesting.
It's so disappointing. Like, this is an amazing tool that we have. Why aren't we using it for all these really big topics?
Wow, it's like we're trying to protect ourselves or something.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of fear there. Steve, you're awesome, man.
Well, I am so grateful that you guys had me on. I mean, it's really cool to think, years ago I was listening to the podcast and just wanting to have these conversations, and being able to come on and do that with you guys is really cool.
Well, it was fun to be on your show. And now that I'm remembering, because your voice and everything is bringing it back to my memory, that conversation. And you seemed a little nervous, and a lot of times the guests are the nervous one. And I realize now that you, I'm not saying you were starstruck, but like you were, you'd been listening to me for years, and you had it down. Like, you did have like your list of questions written out. Yeah. So there's that structured guy.
Oh yeah. Yep. And I don't know if it's obvious, but I talk a lot when I'm nervous, and I've been talking a lot, like I feel like I've been talking really fast. And you know what? We're just going to accept that. Just go with that theme of acceptance,
We're going to say yes to it, right?
Say yes to what is.
We love it. It was great talking to you.
Yeah, man.
Thanks, guys. I appreciate it.
So, 2 teenage boys, a wife that deconverted later. I don't know. Stuff that people go through, and his is a good story. It's a good ending, at least. He didn't commit suicide.
No, that's true.
You just hear it over and over again, but it's hard. And I'm reminded. I mean, and he's a long ways out, and he still really enjoys hearing these stories.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the reasons I still listen to this, I have a lot of reasons why I still listen to these stories, but like, after I went through everything that I went through, let's say there's 100 different topics or issues in being a former fundamentalist. And I think that when you deconvert emotionally, maybe you can talk about 60 of them or something. There's only a part of them that you're emotionally prepared to verbalize, or you can articulate, or that you can remember, or you can process.
Yeah. At one time.
Yeah. And then there's 40 left that you're just not up for. You just can't do it for some reason or the other. And when I listen to other people's stories, there are people that overlap and tell the same story that I already know about myself. And then there are people who hit those remaining 40 stories that I haven't been able to put into words yet. And they were. And so by listening to more stories, I'm better able to fill in like the gaps of my understanding around my experiences. And so I mean, that's why I still really like listening to these stories, because I think there's still so much for me to learn about what I went through by hearing other people talk. Yeah.
And I think for me, that applies to this notion, and I kind of hit on it there at the end, and you could tell that it's still an emotional subject for me. And that's the condemnation of what it means to be human by Christianity from the get-go, like right out of the womb almost, besides the age of accountability, which is just another gymnastics around it. But just the notion that it's bad to be human. Your body has evil tendencies. Cast your eye out. Cut your arm off. Don't trust yourself. Lean not on your own understanding. Your heart is deceitfully wicked. All of these things are much more toxic than I originally thought. The depths of the evil and the damage that they've done to the human race seems to be a bottomless pit.
Yeah, and then for me it makes me think about why as a species have we gotten to this point that we hate ourselves as a species. And I have done no research for this, but like my instinct tells me that as we develop language, self-awareness, ability to speak in the abstract, ability to plan, the bigger we were able to dream. We were able to dream big things for ourselves. And I think as you come head to head with life, but you have this brain that can think so much bigger and language that can articulate so big dreams, then you are looking at your body that's pulling you back.
So maybe that's where the resentment as a species has come from, for the resentment of our own selves, because
in our limitations.
Right, that we hate that we are limited, that our minds are unlimited theoretically, but our bodies are not. And so we hate our bodies because we can't do what we dream to do.
Yeah, I had never thought of it that way, but I think you're right. Especially when we get to fantasizing and dreaming, and it's like, I really, want this or that, or wish for this or that, and it virtually impossible, or it's going to be very difficult just because of these things, and so I resent them.
Yeah.
What Nietzsche, the French word for resentment, ressentiment. I just love that, because it is toxic. Resentment is toxic. Almost invariably, like wherever you point it, if it's going to fuck you up. You walk around and carry around resentment, and it's part of no saying. I mean,
yeah.
So the desire for the positive and the negation of it by limitations, that would be something that would make us disgusted with ourselves. And
it's a theory.
Yeah, no, I think it's complex, and like you said, we don't have research to this. These are just theories, but the opposite end is just how much projection becomes a really powerful and easy out to hating yourself. So your own shit stinks, your own farts stink, your own armpits stink, and you're disgusted. I mean, I just think that we as a creature, within 24 hours of not having a shower, we start to really be disgusting. And this is what we have to live in. This is the body we carry around. This is supposed to be, again, maybe I wish that my body was XYZ, maybe even more muscular in my case. I wish it was more muscular, and I'm mad that my body, there's this guy that's in the NFL combine right now. He's straight out of college, and he's got the most amazing body. I think they called him a Megatron or something. It's like some 6'3", 230, runs an amazing 40 yard dash, outstanding pecs, and 6-pack, 8-pack, I think. And anyway, these you can just you look at yourself in contrast to comparison. And this is tribalism. This is stuff that's inherent in our DNA from survival instincts, and again, resentment, maybe resenting that guy, but just self-disgust. And then because you really, when we're disgusted with something, we run from it. Like, so if I came upon someone else's shit, let's say I walk in the bathroom. This has happened to all of us. We walk into the bathroom stall and somebody has not flushed their shit. Well, I'm immediately going to get the fuck out of that stall, or I'm going to kick the flusher with my foot and run, or I just want out.
But you're not going to shit on top of it.
I'm not going to shit on top of it, and nor am I going to run out of my own stall after I shit. So I'm only disgusted by other people's shit. I mean, I'm disgusted by my own, but I kind of have to live with it. And this is what I think is powerful about being a yes sayer, is that you say yes to your own shit, and in so doing, you extend it. The opposite of projection. You project onto that other person the same compassion you give yourself for shitting.
Yeah.
And so you embrace all the other shitters in the world, and you don't have the need to build a wall.
Mexico and U.S. wall or emotional wall?
Exactly. I'm saying that wall that Trump has pitched to all these people, because they have this very thing. They are haters of themselves, and they've just projected it on brown people. They've found an inferior species or race in their minds, and so they feel better about themselves. It's scaredy cat, bullshit, childish, ignorant shit.
That was worth waiting for, yes.
And it all has to do with being a no-sayer and being disgusted and being in denial about one's own disgusting nature. Like the guy said about his fingernails and toenails. We're better than this. No, we're not.
Yeah.
And the moment that you stop wishing that you were, and you just say, you start trimming your nails and not judging others that have to trim theirs too. Yeah. I don't know. Get a pedicure. Have someone else do it.
Do whatever the fuck you want. Whatever the fuck you want. This makes me think about death, actually. Like,
okay.
I don't know. It's a half-hatched thought, but
I wonder when we come across people who are dying, if we see them that same way, that they remind us.
Yep.
I mean, it's not their shit in a toilet, but in a way, like it is. It's like, it's them. It's like you say, like if you haven't showered or whatever, then you're reminded how human you are, because maybe showering is a denial of death. I don't know. It's a bit of an extension, but maybe that's part of the reason that we're uncomfortable with those who are dying. And yes, I am thinking about Dave. And yes, I'm thinking about
nursing homes.
How will I talk to him in a week from now? Like, because I'm having a reaction to that. Like, how do you talk to someone who's dying? What's the thing that you say? Like,
well, the cool
but knowing
thing,
Dave, I'm sure he'll say enough for both of us.
Well, the thing about Dave is he is an empath, and he knows he doesn't want to talk about his disease. He doesn't, not that he wants to sweep it under the rug, but it's terminal. This is not something where there's going to be some discovery that he hasn't read about. I mean, like people are like, well, couldn't we be doing something, Dave? That's denial of death. He's like, okay, let's talk about our shared interests. Let's talk about what you and I have in common. Let's talk about where we met. Let's talk about what music we share interest in. Let's talk about stuff. And he knows that people, because he's impacted their life, he knows that people need to reach out and be touched by him and touch him. And so he's going to let them do that, because he knows they need it. But he also, he's encouraged by it too, because the sheer amount of people that parade by and touch him is a reminder of how meaningful his life has been.
Yeah.
And so that's all good. It's a win-win if you handle it right. And really handling it right is almost like you said about the unneeded anxiety around telling your kids that these two men are married. Just tell them.
Yeah.
Death is in the room. Dave is here. You're here. You're going to live on. He's not. All of that's true. It's right out here in front of us. We were running around the other night, Dave and I and some friends, and I called him Dead Man Walking. And we just have to be able to laugh about it. Some would say that's crude, or some would say that's
dark.
That's not tactful or whatever. Yeah, well, this is part of what we're talking about when we're talking about expanding the talk aboutable.
Yeah. Like maybe if Dave was a different person, you'd be.
It might be inappropriate.
Differently. Yeah. Like for us, like when our cat died, and it was a big deal for us, shortly after she died, we were at a party and playing some kind of a game where you like fill in answers, like creative answers on your own. And like literally all of the answers that I wrote in were like my dead cat, or like, and I got
these
so
like
many
Mad Libs,
votes.
or what is it?
Well, it was something like that. It's like a game where you like make raps against each other or something. And so it's like you fill in the blanks and stuff. And so like people were shocked, and they were like looking at me like, do we laugh? And I was just laughing my ass off, because it was my dead cat. And I wanted to laugh about it. And I wanted to use humor, not to cover up anything. I had already grieved.
Good point.
I'd already felt all of that pain, and it was fun to fuck with people.
Yeah.
And
but I hear what you're saying, though. It's your call, because it's your cat.
Yeah.
But let's say that you were still sensitive to it. You were that person, and somebody at the party was saying, Marie's dead cat.
Yeah, that would not be okay.
Right? So here we are talking about, let's talk about everything, and yet we're also acknowledging, and I'm not very good at this because I'm extremely untactful, that there are some things that are inappropriate. And
well, not like objectively, like there's no objectively wrong thing. It, like I said in a super ranty post on Facebook the other day, like maybe you fucking deal with people as unique individual people, and you get to know them and their limits and their interests, and you react and respond to that, instead of making up a rule. No, you don't joke about this. No, monogamy is the way to go. Like, no, this or that. No, maybe you just fucking deal with people on an individual basis, and stop making rules that you call morals and apply it to everyone.
I think that's a good differentiation. The subjective and the objective appropriation of subjects.
Yeah, so you let Dave take the lead.
Yeah.
And he's obviously telling people what he's okay with. And so, yeah, you do that.
That makes sense, obviously. I mean, I shouldn't say obviously, but yeah. Probably to most people it is, but it's revelationary to me.
Okay. Yeah, no, it resounds with me too. Yeah.
All right. Good talk. See you out there. I really enjoyed it.
Yep.